In the unforgiving mountains of Colorado, where elite military units push human endurance to its absolute limits, one woman's quiet presence would soon shatter every assumption about strength, competence, and the deadly art of remaining invisible. What happened next would redefine everything the military thought they knew about their most dangerous operatives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the peaks of the Rocky Mountain Training Facility, like secrets waiting to be unveiled. At 6,847 feet above sea level, the air was thin enough to challenge even the most conditioned athletes, and the terrain brutal enough to break the spirit of soldiers who had conquered battlefields across 3 continents. This wasn't just any military installation. This was Fort Blackstone, where the military's most elite units came to prove they belonged among America's deadliest warriors. Audrey Scott stood at the edge of the main courtyard, her small frame barely registering against the imposing backdrop of granite cliffs and steel training structures. At 27 years old, she possessed the kind of unremarkable appearance that made people forget they'd met her within minutes of walking away. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it seemed to stretch her features, making her green eyes appear larger than they actually were. The standard-issue combat fatigues hung loose on her petite build, and her boots were scuffed but clean, suggesting someone who followed protocol without drawing attention to herself. For 2 weeks, Audrey had been a ghost in the machine of Fort Blackstone's Advanced Tactical Operations course. While other candidates threw themselves into physical challenges with explosive energy, she moved with an economy of motion that bordered on invisible. When teams formed for combat exercises, she was typically the last one chosen, accepted with reluctant shrugs rather than eager recruitment. During mess hall conversations, she sat alone at corner tables, methodically eating her meals while absorbing fragments of conversation from nearby groups. The other candidates had developed their own theories about her presence. Some whispered that she was connected to someone important, a senator's daughter or a general's niece, who needed to be accommodated without actually being challenged. Others suggested she was part of some diversity initiative, brought in to meet quotas rather than contribute meaningfully to the program. A few of the more charitable ones simply assumed she was in over her head and would wash out within another week or 2. What none of them knew was that Audrey Scott had spent the last 18 months learning to become a different kind of weapon entirely. Her training hadn't taken place in traditional military academies or special forces schools. Instead, she had been shaped by an organization so classified that its existence was known to fewer than 30 people in the entire Department of Defense. They called themselves the Phantom Unit, and their specialty was creating operatives who could move through enemy territory without being detected, gathering intelligence and eliminating targets with surgical precision. The Phantom Unit didn't recruit typical soldiers. They sought individuals who possessed an almost supernatural ability to blend into their surroundings, to become functionally invisible in plain sight. Audrey had been identified during her service as a communications specialist in Afghanistan, where her commanding officers had noticed her uncanny ability to move through hostile villages without triggering the kind of defensive responses that other soldiers encountered. Local populations seemed to look right through her, treating her presence as unremarkable even when she was clearly armed and in uniform. Dr. Sarah Chen, the military psychologist who had first recommended Audrey for Phantom Unit evaluation, had described her as possessing, quote, adaptive camouflage capabilities that extend beyond traditional training. In simpler terms, Audrey Scott could make herself forgettable, unremarkable, invisible. It wasn't magic or technology. It was a combination of body language, vocal patterns, movement dynamics, and psychological manipulation so subtle that even trained observers failed to register her as a threat until it was far too late. Ivy, the irony of her current situation at Fort Blackstone wasn't lost on her. Here she was, surrounded by soldiers who prided themselves on tactical awareness and threat assessment, and not one of them had identified her as anything more than dead weight. They saw a small woman who seemed overwhelmed by the physical demands of elite training, someone who probably belonged behind a desk rather than in a combat zone. Their dismissive attitudes weren't just misguided. They were a testament to how effectively her training had rewired her ability to project weakness while concealing lethal competence. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez had been watching Audrey with growing irritation for the entire 2 weeks. Rodriguez was a career soldier, 34 years old, with the kind of muscular build and confident swagger that came from 15 years of proving himself in some of the military's most demanding units. He had tattoos covering both arms, each one representing a deployment or achievement that had earned him respect among his peers. His black hair was cut in a perfect high and tight, and his brown eyes held the steady intensity of someone who had seen combat and emerged stronger for it. Rodriguez had built his reputation on his ability to identify weak links before they became operational liabilities. In his experience, soldiers who couldn't keep up during training became dangerous burdens in actual combat situations. They slowed down their units, required protection they hadn't earned, and sometimes made desperate decisions that got good people killed. Everything about Audrey Scott triggered his professional alarm systems. During physical training, she consistently finished in the bottom quarter of the group. Her times on obstacle courses were adequate but unimpressive. Her performance during weapons training was competent, but showed no signs of exceptional skill. Most telling to Rodriguez, she never pushed herself to excel or demonstrated the kind of competitive fire that characterized elite soldiers. She seemed content to meet minimum standards rather than striving for excellence. What Rodriguez didn't understand was that mediocrity was Audrey's camouflage. Every lackluster performance was carefully calibrated. She could have completed the obstacle courses in half the time, but that would have drawn attention. She could have achieved perfect scores on weapons training, but exceptional marksmanship would have raised questions about her background. Instead, she performed just well enough to avoid remedial training while maintaining the impression that she was struggling to keep up. The other candidates had taken their cues from Rodriguez's obvious disapproval. If a respected staff sergeant thought Audrey didn't belong, then she probably didn't belong. Captain Jennifer Walsh, a helicopter pilot with commendations from 3 theaters of operation, had started referring to Audrey as the lost intern during private conversations with other female candidates. Lieutenant Thomas Park, fresh from Ranger School, with scores that had impressed his instructors, made jokes about carrying dead weight whenever team assignments were announced. But it was Corporal Brandon Hayes who had decided to make Audrey's perceived inadequacy a source of public entertainment. Hayes was 25 years old, built like a linebacker, with the kind of aggressive personality that masked deeper insecurities about his own competence. He had been struggling with some of the more technical aspects of the training program, and focusing attention on Audrey's apparent weaknesses allowed him to deflect scrutiny from his own performance issues. Hayes had developed a routine of making loud comments whenever Audrey was nearby. During morning formation, he would stage whisper to his friends about participation trophies and lowered standards. When teams were selected for exercises, he would dramatically sigh and make comments about babysitting duty if Audrey was assigned to his group. His behavior was technically within the bounds of military hazing traditions, but it carried a cruelty that made some of the other candidates uncomfortable. The morning that would change everything began like all the others. Audrey arrived at the training area 15 minutes early, as was her habit, and began methodically checking her equipment. Her movements were precise and efficient, but not in a way that suggested exceptional training. To casual observers, she simply looked like someone who was being extra careful because she couldn't afford to make mistakes. She had positioned herself near an equipment shed, partially obscured by shadows that seemed to gather around her naturally. This was an accident or coincidence. Part of her Phantom unit training involved unconscious spatial awareness, automatically positioning herself in locations that minimized visibility while maintaining tactical advantages. Even here, in what should have been a safe training environment, her conditioning kept her in positions where she could observe everything while remaining largely unnoticed. The other candidates were arriving in clusters, their conversations animated with the kind of nervous energy that preceded challenging training exercises. Today's agenda included advanced urban warfare simulations, scenarios that would test not just physical capabilities, but decision-making under pressure. The exercises were designed to identify candidates who possessed the mental flexibility and tactical intuition necessary for special operations work. Rodriguez emerged from the command building carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone who was about to deliver news that wouldn't be universally welcome. Behind him walked Colonel Patricia Manning, the commanding officer of Fort Blackstone's training division. Manning was a legend in military circles, a woman who had broken barriers and shattered expectations throughout her 22-year career. She had served in combat zones where few women had been allowed, commanded units that had previously been exclusively male, and earned respect through competence rather than political considerations. That person. Manning's presence meant that today's exercises were more than routine training. When the base commander personally observed training sessions, it usually indicated that important decisions were being made about candidates' futures. Some of them would advance to the next phase of selection. Others would be thanked for their service and sent back to their regular units. As the candidates assembled in formation, Audrey took her customary position in the back row, slightly to the left of center. It was a spot that kept her out of direct sight lines while allowing her to observe the entire group. Her posture was correct but unremarkable, her expression neutral and attentive. To anyone watching, she looked like a junior soldier trying not to be noticed, which was exactly the impression she wanted to create. What none of them could see was the way her eyes moved, cataloging details and analyzing patterns with the precision of a trained intelligence operative. She noted the way Rodriguez kept glancing at his watch, suggesting he was operating on a tighter schedule than usual. She observed Manning's body language, reading signs of tension that indicated today's exercises would carry higher stakes than previous training. Most importantly, she registered the way other candidates were positioning themselves, unconsciously forming alliances and hierarchies that revealed their true attitudes about leadership and teamwork. The mountain air was crisp and thin, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of a day that would test everyone's limits. Around her, Audrey could sense the energy building, the anticipation of challenges that would separate those who belonged from those who didn't. She had been waiting for this moment, this opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that had been carefully hidden for 2 weeks. Today, the careful balance between concealment and revelation would shift. Today, she would begin to show them why certain people in very classified circles had given her a nickname that reflected her most dangerous skill. Today, they would start to understand why she was called the Shadow. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Colonel Manning stepped forward, her combat boots crunching against the gravel as she surveyed the assembled candidates. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a flawless bun, and her uniform bore ribbons that told the story of a career spent in the world's most dangerous places. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through blood, sweat, and decisions that had saved countless lives. "Ladies and gentlemen," Manning began, her words cutting through the mountain air like a blade. "Today marks the midpoint of your evaluation period. Half of you will advance to Phase 2 of selection. The other half will return to your regular units with our thanks for your service." The weight of her announcement settled over the formation like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just another training day. This was Judgment Day, the moment when weeks of preparation would be distilled into a single assessment that would determine their futures. Manning's eyes swept across the candidates, pausing briefly on each face. When her gaze reached Audrey, there was no recognition, no special acknowledgement. To all appearances, the colonel saw exactly what everyone else saw, a small woman who seemed overwhelmed by the intensity of elite military training. But appearances, as Audrey knew better than most, could be fatally deceptive. What Manning didn't reveal to the assembled candidates was that she had been briefed about Audrey's presence 3 weeks earlier, during a classified video conference that had included representatives from the Pentagon's most secretive departments. The briefing had been unusual, even by the standards of special operations planning. Most elite candidates arrived with thick files detailing their achievements, training records, and psychological evaluations. Audrey Scott's file consisted of a single page with her basic biographical information and a note that simply read, "Phantom Unit Graduate. Observe and evaluate without interference." The Phantom Unit's existence was compartmentalized at levels that made traditional special forces seem like public knowledge. Manning herself only knew fragments of what the program entailed, but those fragments were enough to understand that Audrey represented capabilities that conventional military training couldn't produce. The unit specialized in creating operatives who could function in environments where traditional soldiers would be detected and eliminated within hours. Manning had been told that Audrey's evaluation would serve a dual purpose. On the surface, she was just another candidate competing for advancement in the Advanced Tactical Operations course. But beneath that cover story, her performance was being assessed for potential deployment in operations that couldn't be discussed outside of the most secure facilities in Washington. The colonel's job was to provide realistic training scenarios while allowing Phantom Unit evaluators to observe how their operative functioned under pressure. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, clipboard in hand, ready to announce the day's exercise parameters. His expression suggested someone who was looking forward to seeing certain candidates finally exposed as inadequate for elite service. He had spent 2 weeks watching Audrey struggle through training, and today's high-stakes evaluation would finally provide the justification for removing her from the program. Today's exercise is urban warfare simulation, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the formation. You'll be divided into 2 teams for a building clearance operation. Team Alpha will assault a fortified position, while Team Bravo provides overwatch and eliminates high-value targets. He paused, consulting his notes with the deliberate timing of someone who enjoyed holding an audience's attention. Team assignments have been made based on your performance evaluations over the past 2 weeks. Team Alpha will handle the direct assault mission. Team Bravo will be responsible for precision elimination of enemy commanders. The distinction was significant, and every candidate understood the implications immediately. Team Alpha would be given the glamorous, high-visibility mission that showcased traditional military virtues, aggression, firepower, and frontal assault tactics. Team Bravo would be assigned the more technical, precision-based mission that required patience, marksmanship, and tactical intelligence. Rodriguez began reading names for Team Alpha, and the list included every candidate who had distinguished themselves during previous exercises. Captain Walsh, Lieutenant Park, Corporal Hayes, and 8 others, who had consistently demonstrated the kind of aggressive competence that military evaluators traditionally rewarded. These were the candidates who looked like elite soldiers, acted like elite soldiers, and performed like elite soldiers in conventional training scenarios. Team Bravo, Rodriguez continued, and his tone shifted subtly, carrying a note of resignation that suggested he was announcing assignments for candidates who needed to be accommodated rather than challenged. The list included 6 candidates who had shown technical competence but lacked the commanding presence that characterized the Alpha team members. Scott Audrey, Rodriguez announced, placing her name last on the Bravo roster. You'll be assigned to Overwatch Position 7, providing intelligence support for the primary elimination teams. The assignment was clearly designed to minimize her impact on the exercise. Position 7 was located on the periphery of the operational area, with limited visibility of the main action. It was the kind of assignment given to candidates who needed to participate without having opportunities to demonstrate exceptional capability or create operational problems for more qualified team members. What Rodriguez didn't understand was that he had just placed Audrey exactly where she needed to be. Position 7 offered something that the more prestigious assignments lacked: complete tactical freedom. While the other Team Bravo members would be focused on specific targets and following predetermined protocols, Audrey would have the latitude to observe, assess, and act according to her own judgment. The briefing continued with technical details about the exercise scenario. The urban warfare simulation was designed to replicate conditions that special operations units might encounter in hostile cities around the world. The enemy would be played by instructors and advanced candidates from previous training cycles, individuals who understood military tactics well enough to provide realistic opposition. The building complex was a 3-story structure designed specifically for urban warfare training. It featured multiple entry points, overlapping fields of fire, hidden passages, and defensive positions that had been refined through years of tactical exercises. The structure had been used to test thousands of candidates, and the instructors knew every angle, every weakness, every opportunity for tactical advantage. Team Alpha's mission was straightforward: breach the building, clear each floor systematically, and secure 3 high-value targets who would be positioned in different locations throughout the structure. Success would be measured by speed of completion, minimization of casualties, and successful target acquisition. It was the kind of mission that rewarded bold action and aggressive leadership. Team Bravo's mission was more complex and required different skills entirely. They needed to establish overwatch positions that provided visibility into the building, identify enemy commanders before the assault began, and eliminate those targets without alerting the defensive forces. Success would be measured by accuracy of intelligence, precision of elimination, and coordination with the assault team. As the briefing concluded, candidates began moving toward their equipment assignments. The atmosphere was charged with competitive energy, but also with the tension that came from knowing that careers would be made or broken based on the next few hours of performance. Audrey collected her assigned equipment with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout her time at Fort Blackstone. Her gear included standard-issue body armor, communications equipment, and a precision rifle configured for long-range engagement. To observers, she handled the equipment competently, but without the confident familiarity that characterized truly elite marksmen. What they couldn't see was the way her hands automatically adjusted the rifle's scope settings, compensating for elevation and wind conditions that she had assessed unconsciously during the briefing. Her Phantom unit training had included marksmanship instruction that went far beyond traditional military sniper schools. She had been taught to engage targets under conditions that would challenge the most experienced special operations personnel. But more importantly, she had been trained to use her weapon as just one tool among many. Phantom unit operatives were expected to accomplish their missions through whatever means proved most effective, whether that involved precision shooting, close-quarters combat, psychological manipulation, or simply remaining undetected until targets eliminated themselves through poor tactical decisions. As the teams moved toward their starting positions, Audrey found herself walking alongside Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, a communications specialist who had been assigned to Team Bravo's coordination role. Santos was 29 years old, with the kind of technical expertise that made her invaluable for complex operations. But she lacked the aggressive personality that characterized most of the Alpha team members. "Nervous?" Santos asked quietly as they approached the staging area. Audrey considered the question carefully. Nervous wasn't the right word for what she was feeling. After 18 months of Phantom unit training, followed by 2 weeks of careful observation at Fort Blackstone, she was experiencing something closer to anticipation. For the first time since arriving at the facility, she would have the opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that had been carefully hidden. "I'm ready," she replied, and there was something in her tone that made Santos look at her more carefully. For just a moment, Santos glimpsed something beneath Audrey's carefully maintained facade of mediocrity. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but there was a confidence in her voice that didn't match her previous performance record. Santos had spent enough time in combat zones to recognize the sound of genuine competence, and what she heard from Audrey didn't match what she had observed during training. But before Santos could pursue that thought, they had reached the staging area where Team Bravo was receiving final instructions from their tactical coordinator. The exercise would begin in 30 minutes, and each team member needed to reach their assigned positions without being detected by the defensive forces. Audrey listened to the coordination briefing with appropriate attention, but her mind was already working through tactical possibilities that extended far beyond her official assignment. Position 7 might have been intended to limit her impact, but she understood something that Rodriguez and the other evaluators had missed. In complex tactical situations, the greatest advantages often belonged to those who remained unnoticed until the moment they chose to act. She was about to demonstrate why the most dangerous operatives were often the ones who appeared least threatening, and why her Phantom unit instructors had chosen to call her the Shadow. The exercise was about to begin, and with it, the first glimpse of capabilities that had been hidden in plain sight for 2 weeks. The mountain wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of revelations that would change everything the observers thought they knew about tactical competence. Audrey checked her equipment one final time, her movements economical and precise, and prepared to show them what happened when shadows came alive. The urban warfare complex loomed against the Colorado sky like a concrete monument to tactical violence. 3 stories of reinforced walls, steel-barred windows, and carefully positioned defensive structures designed to challenge even the most experienced special operations units. The building had been constructed with input from veterans of urban combat in Fallujah, Mogadishu, and a dozen other cities where American forces had learned hard lessons about fighting in confined spaces. Audrey moved through the staging area with deliberate invisibility, her presence registering just enough to avoid suspicion while remaining forgettable to casual observers. Around her, Team Bravo members were conducting final equipment checks and reviewing tactical maps with the nervous energy that preceded high-stakes operations. The air was thick with anticipation and the metallic scent of weapons oil. Position 7 was exactly what Rodriguez had intended it to be, a marginalized assignment that would keep Audrey occupied without giving her opportunities to impact the exercise outcome. Located on a rocky outcrop approximately 400 meters from the main building, it offered limited visibility of the primary objective, and no direct line of sight to the most critical tactical positions. It was the kind of assignment given to candidates who needed to be accommodated rather than utilized. But as Audrey studied the tactical maps with apparent confusion, her Phantom Unit training was already identifying advantages that the exercise planners had overlooked. Position 7's elevation provided sight lines into secondary buildings that weren't part of the official exercise area but would inevitably be used by defensive forces seeking tactical advantages. More importantly, the position's isolation meant she would operate without direct supervision once the exercise began. Captain Walsh was organizing Team Alpha's assault plan with the kind of confident aggression that had characterized her entire military career. Walsh was a natural leader, someone who inspired confidence through competence and decisiveness. Her assault team included the most physically capable candidates, individuals who had consistently demonstrated the kind of explosive effectiveness that characterized elite military units. "We breach simultaneously through points Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie," Walsh announced, indicating positions on the tactical map with precise movements. "Hayes takes point on Alpha breach, Park handles Bravo, and I'll lead Charlie team through the main entrance." Her plan was tactically sound and represented exactly the kind of aggressive, coordinated assault that military doctrine recommended for urban warfare scenarios. The three-pronged attack would overwhelm defensive positions while preventing enemy forces from concentrating their resistance at any single breach point. Lieutenant Park nodded his approval, studying the building schematics with the intensity of someone who understood that careers could be made or broken based on the next few hours. Park had graduated at the top of his Ranger School class and possessed the kind of analytical mind that excelled at complex tactical problems. His confidence in the assault plan was based on solid military training and extensive study of urban warfare principles. Corporal Hayes was less analytical but more enthusiastic about the opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities in a high-visibility mission. Hayes had been frustrated by 2 weeks of training exercises that emphasized technical skills over raw aggression. Today's assault mission would finally allow him to showcase the kind of direct action competence that had earned him respect in his previous units. "What about Overwatch coordination?" Park asked, gesturing toward the positions where Team Bravo members would be stationed. Walsh consulted her notes, but her attention to Team Bravo's role was clearly secondary to her focus on the assault plan. "They'll provide target identification and elimination of enemy commanders before we breach. Standard Overwatch protocol." The dismissive tone suggested that Walsh, like most of the Alpha team members, viewed Team Bravo's mission as support work, rather than critical tactical operations. It was an attitude that reflected traditional military hierarchies, where direct action took precedence over intelligence gathering and precision elimination. What none of them understood was that their assault plan had been developed based on incomplete intelligence. The exercise designers had spent weeks preparing defensive strategies that anticipated exactly the kind of coordinated frontal assault that Team Alpha was planning. Hidden defensive positions, overlapping fields of fire, and prepared fallback routes had been positioned to channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones. Meanwhile, Team Bravo was receiving their own briefing from Master Sergeant David Kim, a 20-year veteran who specialized in precision operations and intelligence coordination. Kim had served with special operations units in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he had learned that successful missions often depended more on accurate intelligence than overwhelming firepower. "Your primary mission is target identification and elimination," Kim explained, his voice carrying the authority of extensive combat experience. "Secondary mission is providing real-time intelligence to the assault teams. Communication protocols are standard, but remember that radio discipline is critical once the exercise begins." Sergeant Santos raised her hand. "What about contingency protocols if the assault teams encounter unexpected resistance?" Kim's expression suggested that he appreciated the question. "Adapt and overcome. Your positions give you visibility that the assault teams lack. Use that advantage to provide tactical guidance. But remember that your primary responsibility is precision elimination of high-value targets." As the briefing continued, Audrey maintained her facade of careful attention while her mind worked through tactical possibilities that extended far beyond the official mission parameters. Her Phantom Unit training had emphasized adaptability over rigid adherence to predetermined plans. In real-world operations, the most successful operatives were those who could recognize when circumstances required deviation from original objectives. The equipment distribution process revealed additional details about how the exercise evaluators viewed each candidate's capabilities. Team Alpha members received state-of-the-art assault rifles, advanced communication systems, and tactical gear that represented the military's most modern equipment. Their weapons were configured for close-quarters combat, with accessories designed to maximize effectiveness in confined spaces. Team Bravo members received precision rifles and observation equipment appropriate for Overwatch missions. The weapons were accurate and reliable, but they lacked the advanced features that characterized the equipment assigned to Alpha team members. The message was clear. Team Bravo was expected to provide support, not to drive tactical outcomes. Audrey accepted her assigned rifle with the same competent but unremarkable manner she had displayed throughout her time at Fort Blackstone. The weapon was a standard-issue precision rifle, well-maintained but unexceptional. She conducted the required safety checks with appropriate care, but without the fluid familiarity that would have indicated advanced marksmanship training. What the equipment managers didn't see was the way her hands automatically adjusted the rifle's configuration for optimal performance, subtle modifications to the scope settings, grip position, and stock adjustment that would improve accuracy under the specific environmental conditions they were facing. These adjustments were made unconsciously, the result of training that had been drilled into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions. The defensive forces were already in position within the urban warfare complex, having spent the previous day preparing ambush sites and defensive positions. The enemy team consisted of instructors and advanced candidates who understood military tactics well enough to provide realistic opposition. They knew the building's layout intimately and had developed defensive strategies specifically designed to counter the kind of assault tactics that would be employed by the attacking teams. Master Sergeant Patricia Reynolds was commanding the defensive forces, and she had earned her reputation by making life difficult for overconfident candidates who assumed that superior firepower guaranteed tactical success. Reynolds had served 3 tours in Iraq, where she had learned that urban warfare favored defenders who understood how to use terrain advantages and prepared positions to offset numerical disadvantages. "They'll come in hard and fast," Reynolds told her defensive team during their final briefing. "Alpha team will attempt simultaneous breaches at multiple points. Our job is to channel them into predetermined positions where we can engage them effectively." Reynolds had positioned her most experienced defenders at the expected breach points, with overlapping fields of fire that would force the assault teams to advance through carefully prepared kill zones. Additional defenders were stationed in secondary positions, ready to engage targets of opportunity and prevent the assault teams from establishing secure footholds within the building. But Reynolds had also positioned observers in concealed locations outside the main building, tasked with monitoring the Team Bravo Overwatch positions. She understood that successful defense required neutralizing enemy intelligence capabilities before they could provide tactical guidance to assault forces. "Watch the Overwatch positions carefully," Reynolds instructed her observers. "Eliminate their spotters early, and the assault teams will be operating blind." As each hour approached, tension throughout the staging area became almost palpable. Candidates who had spent 2 weeks competing in training exercises were now facing an evaluation that would determine their futures. The confident banter that had characterized earlier training sessions was replaced by focused concentration and nervous energy. Team Alpha members were conducting final weapons checks and reviewing assault protocols with the intensity of soldiers preparing for actual combat. Their confidence was evident, but it was accompanied by the kind of pre-mission tension that experienced soldiers recognized as normal and necessary. Team Bravo members were making final adjustments to their observation equipment and confirming communication protocols. Their mission lacked the dramatic appeal of direct assault, but they understood that their intelligence gathering and precision elimination capabilities could determine the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Audrey completed her preparations with the same methodical care she had shown throughout her time at Fort Blackstone. Her equipment was properly configured, her communications were functioning correctly, and her position assignments were clearly understood. To observers, she looked like someone who was prepared but not particularly confident about the challenges ahead. But beneath her carefully maintained facade, something was shifting. For 2 weeks, she had observed these candidates, studied their capabilities, and assessed their tactical understanding. Now, as the exercise prepared to begin, she was transitioning from passive observation to active engagement. The skills that had been carefully hidden were about to be demonstrated, and the careful balance between concealment and revelation was about to shift dramatically. Colonel Manning watched the final preparations from her observation post, knowing that the next few hours would provide critical intelligence about capabilities that couldn't be assessed through conventional training methods. The exercise would test tactical competence, but it would also reveal how candidates responded to unexpected developments and tactical complications. The mountain wind carried the scent of pine and anticipation as final countdown procedures began. In 15 minutes, the exercise would commence, and with it, the first demonstration of capabilities that had been hidden in plain sight for 2 weeks. Audrey Scott was about to show them why certain people in very classified circles had learned to fear the shadows. The digital countdown display reached 0 at exactly 0800 hours, and Fort Blackstone's urban warfare complex erupted into controlled chaos. Team Alpha moved with the explosive precision of a well-oiled machine, their assault formation flowing toward the concrete structure like water finding the path of least resistance. Captain Walsh's voice crackled through the communications network, coordinating the three-pronged attack with the confident authority of someone who had led similar operations in actual combat zones. Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, execute breach protocol on my mark, Walsh commanded, her tone carrying none of the uncertainty that had characterized some candidates during previous exercises. This was her element, the kind of direct action scenario where her natural leadership abilities could shine without ambiguity or hesitation. Audrey had reached position 7 15 minutes before the exercise began, moving through the rocky terrain with a deceptive awkwardness that masked her actual capabilities. To any observer, she appeared to be struggling with the weight of her equipment and the challenging terrain, pausing frequently to check her map and confirm her route. It was a carefully crafted performance, designed to reinforce the impression that she was overwhelmed by the demands of elite training. But once she reached her assigned location, something fundamental shifted in her demeanor. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible, but for those trained to recognize such things, it would have been unmistakable. Her movements became more economical, her positioning more deliberate, and her attention focused with laser-like intensity on the tactical situation developing below. Position 7 offered exactly what Rodriguez had intended: limited visibility of the main assault routes and minimal opportunity to impact the exercise outcome. The rocky outcrop was positioned at an angle that blocked direct observation of 2 of the 3 breach points, and thick pine trees obscured sightlines to several critical defensive positions. It was the kind of assignment that ensured participation without allowing for exceptional performance. What Rodriguez hadn't anticipated was that Audrey's training had taught her to find advantages in positions that others considered disadvantageous. While her official field of fire was limited, the elevation provided sightlines into areas that weren't part of the exercise parameters, but would inevitably become tactically relevant as the situation developed. Through her rifle scope, Audrey began conducting a systematic assessment of the defensive positions that were visible from her location. Her training had taught her to read terrain and defensive preparations in ways that went far beyond conventional military doctrine. She could identify concealed positions by recognizing subtle disturbances and natural patterns, spot camouflaged personnel by detecting movement inconsistencies, and predict tactical developments by understanding how experienced defenders would respond to specific assault patterns. What she saw made her reassess everything she thought she knew about the exercise scenario. The defensive forces weren't positioned according to standard doctrine for urban warfare scenarios. Instead, they had established a layered defense that suggested someone with extensive combat experience was directing their preparations. Hidden firing positions had been established in locations that would channel attacking forces into carefully prepared kill zones, and secondary defensive lines had been positioned to prevent successful withdrawal if the initial assault failed. More concerning was the evidence of defensive positions outside the main building complex. Through her scope, Audrey could identify at least 3 concealed locations where defenders had established observation posts with clear sight lines to Team Bravo's overwatch positions. These weren't part of the official exercise parameters, but they represented a level of tactical sophistication that suggested the defensive forces were treating this evaluation more seriously than anyone had anticipated. Team Alpha's assault began with textbook precision. Hayes led his breach team through the designated Alpha entry point with explosive aggression, using flashbang grenades and overwhelming firepower to establish an initial foothold within the building. Park's Bravo team executed their breach simultaneously, coordinating their advance to prevent defensive forces from concentrating resistance at any single point. Walsh's Charlie team attacked through the main entrance with the kind of bold frontal assault that military doctrine recommended for scenarios where speed and aggression could overcome prepared defensive positions. Her team moved with practiced efficiency, clearing rooms systematically while maintaining communication with the other assault elements. For the first few minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. Team Alpha reported successful breaches at all 3 entry points, with initial resistance described as moderate and manageable. Radio communications indicated that the assault teams were advancing through the building systematically, encountering defensive positions that offered realistic opposition without creating insurmountable obstacles. But Audrey could see what the assault teams couldn't. The defensive positions they had encountered were deliberately weak, designed to provide token resistance while channeling the attacking forces deeper into the building where stronger defensive lines waited. The real battle hadn't begun yet, and when it did, Team Alpha would discover that they had been maneuvered into positions that favored the defenders. Through her scope, she watched as concealed defensive positions began moving into firing positions that would allow them to engage Team Alpha from unexpected angles. These weren't part of the official exercise scenario, but they represented the kind of tactical innovation that separated experienced combat veterans from soldiers who had only trained in controlled environments. Team Bravo's other members were beginning to report enemy contacts from their assigned positions, but their observations were limited to the predetermined target areas that had been included in the exercise briefing. None of them had identified the secondary defensive positions that Audrey could see preparing to spring their trap. Sergeant Santos's voice crackled through the communications network with professional competence. "Bravo Control, this is Bravo 2. I have eyes on 2 enemy personnel in the northwest quadrant. Grid coordinates 347 to 891. They appear to be coordinating defensive movements." Other Team Bravo members reported similar observations, providing intelligence about enemy positions within their assigned sectors. Their reports were accurate but incomplete, missing the broader tactical picture that was developing outside their designated observation areas. Audrey found herself facing a decision that her Phantom unit training had prepared her for, but that conventional military doctrine didn't address. She could observe within her assigned parameters, providing minimal intelligence about the limited area she was supposed to monitor. Or she could expand her observations to include tactical developments that would significantly impact the exercise outcome, even though doing so would require her to exceed her official mission boundaries. The decision was made easier by what she observed next: defensive personnel moving into positions that would allow them to engage Team Bravo members who were focused on their assigned sectors and unaware of threats developing outside their observation areas. Within minutes, several of her fellow candidates would be eliminated, not because they lacked competence, but because the exercise parameters hadn't prepared them for the level of tactical sophistication they were actually facing. "Bravo Control, this is Bravo 7, Audrey transmitted, her voice carrying none of the uncertainty that had characterized her previous communications. "I'm observing enemy movement in sectors outside my assigned area. Request permission to expand observation parameters." Master Sergeant Kim's response carried a note of surprise. Throughout the exercise preparation, Audrey had demonstrated competence but had never shown initiative that extended beyond her specific assignments. "Bravo 7, maintain your assigned sector. Other positions will monitor adjacent areas." But Audrey could see what Kim couldn't. The other positions didn't have sightlines to the areas where defensive forces were maneuvering. The exercise parameters had been designed based on assumptions about how defensive forces would position themselves, and those assumptions were proving incorrect. Through her scope, she watched as a concealed defensive position prepared to engage Sergeant Santos, who was focused on her assigned observation area and unaware of the threat developing from her blind spot. Santos was a competent soldier and a decent person who didn't deserve to be eliminated because of flawed exercise planning. The moment that would change everything was approaching rapidly. In less than 2 minutes, Santos would be engaged by defenders she couldn't see, and her elimination would cascade into tactical problems that would compromise the entire Team Bravo mission. Team Alpha would lose their intelligence support at the moment when they needed it most, and the exercise would devolve into a demonstration of how superior defensive positions could defeat even well-trained assault forces. Audrey's training had taught her that real-world operations rarely proceeded according to predetermined plans, and that the most successful operatives were those who could recognize when circumstances required deviation from original objectives. The Phantom unit had emphasized adaptability over rigid adherence to protocol, and they had trained their operatives to make tactical decisions based on developing situations rather than predetermined parameters. Through her scope, she could see the entire tactical situation developing with crystalline clarity. Team Alpha was advancing into carefully prepared kill zones, Team Bravo was about to lose half its observation capability, and the exercise was about to demonstrate that superior planning could overcome superior firepower. Unless someone intervened with capabilities that had been carefully hidden for 2 weeks, Audrey Scott shifted her rifle's point of aim toward a target that wasn't part of her official assignment, preparing to demonstrate why certain people in very classified circles had learned to fear the shadows. The exercise was about to take a turn that none of the planners had anticipated, and the careful balance between concealment and revelation was about to shift dramatically. The mountain wind carried the sound of distant gunfire as Team Alpha encountered the first real defensive resistance. Within moments, everything would change, and Audrey would begin to show them what happened when shadows decided to come alive. The crack of Audrey's rifle cut through the mountain air like a thunderclap, the sound echoing off the granite cliffs with sharp finality. 437 meters away, a concealed defensive position that had been preparing to eliminate Sergeant Santos suddenly went silent. The shot had been taken without authorization, without warning, and with a precision that defied everything the observers thought they knew about Audrey Scott's capabilities. Master Sergeant Kim's voice exploded across the communications network, confusion and anger evident in every syllable. "Bravo 7, what the hell was that? You are not authorized to engage targets outside your sector." But Audrey was already adjusting her position, her rifle tracking toward a second concealed location where defensive personnel were reacting to their comrades' elimination. Her movements were fluid and economical, displaying none of the hesitant uncertainty that had characterized her performance during 2 weeks of training. This was someone who had spent hundreds of hours perfecting the art of precision engagement under combat conditions. "Bravo Control, Bravo 7, she responded, her voice carrying a calm authority that seemed to come from nowhere. Enemy sniper in overwatch position was targeting Bravo 2. Threat eliminated. Through her scope, Santos could see the defensive position that Audrey had just neutralized, a carefully camouflaged location that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been seconds away from elimination, and the quiet woman everyone had dismissed as dead weight had just saved her mission. Jesus Christ, Santos whispered into her radio. "Bravo 7, I didn't even see that position. How did you?" Her question was interrupted by the sharp crack of Audrey's rifle firing again. Another concealed defensive position, this one threatening Team Alpha's advance through the building's eastern corridor, suddenly ceased its coordinated movement. The defensive forces had been maneuvering to establish a crossfire that would have trapped Hayes' breach team in a kill zone, but their coordination had just been shattered by precise elimination of their command element. Colonel Manning watched the tactical display with growing amazement, her understanding of the exercise dynamics shifting with each shot fired from Position 7. The defensive plan that Master Sergeant Reynolds had crafted was sophisticated and comprehensive, designed to demonstrate how prepared positions could defeat numerically superior assault forces. But those preparations were being systematically dismantled by someone who shouldn't have possessed the capability to impact the exercise at all. "Kim," Manning said into her command radio, "what's Bravo 7's background? Her file doesn't include advanced marksmanship training." Kim consulted his roster, confusion evident in his voice. "Ma'am, Scott is listed as a communications specialist. No special training indicators, no advanced schools, no combat deployments. She's been struggling to meet basic standards throughout the evaluation period." Manning studied the tactical display more carefully, noting the precision and timing of the shots from Position 7. Military snipers required years of training to achieve that level of accuracy under field conditions, and the tactical awareness needed to identify concealed positions suggested intelligence training that went far beyond conventional military education. "Get me her complete service record," Manning ordered, "and I want to know how she identified those defensive positions." But Audrey wasn't finished, demonstrating capabilities that had been carefully hidden. Through her scope, She had identified the entire defensive network that Reynolds had established outside the main building complex. 6 concealed positions, each manned by experienced instructors who understood how to use terrain advantages and prepared ambush sites to defeat conventional assault tactics. The defensive plan was tactically brilliant, but it depended on coordination between positions that could observe and support each other. By eliminating key command elements, Audrey was systematically degrading the defensive network's ability to respond effectively to Team Alpha's advance. Her third shot eliminated a forward observer who had been directing defensive fire against Park's breach team. The observer had been positioned in a location that provided excellent visibility of the building's interior while remaining concealed from conventional overwatch positions. But Audrey's elevated position offered sightlines that the exercise planners hadn't considered, and her Phantom unit training had taught her to recognize the subtle indicators that revealed concealed personnel. Team Alpha was beginning to notice that their advance was encountering less organized resistance than expected. Walsh's voice crackled through the communications network with professional confusion. "Alpha Control, we're not receiving the level of defensive coordination that was anticipated. Enemy resistance appears to be fragmenting." Hayes reported similar observations from his position within the building's eastern wing. "Alpha 1, enemy defensive positions are operating independently. They've lost command coordination." What Team Alpha couldn't see was that their tactical success was being enabled by precision elimination of defensive command elements from a position they had dismissed as irrelevant. The small woman they had written off as dead weight was systematically dismantling a defensive network that had been designed by combat veterans with decades of experience. Reynolds was experiencing the tactical nightmare that every defensive commander feared: losing control of prepared positions because of accurate enemy fire from unexpected directions. Her carefully coordinated defensive plan was collapsing as key personnel were eliminated before they could execute their assigned roles. "Where the hell is that sniper fire coming from?" Reynolds demanded over the defensive communications network. "We need to identify and neutralize that position immediately." But her remaining defensive personnel were focused on engaging Team Alpha's direct assault, and none of them had clear sightlines to Position 7. The exercise parameters had been designed to test conventional assault tactics against prepared defensive positions, and no one had anticipated that a marginalized Overwatch position would prove capable of systematic elimination of the defensive network. Audrey's fourth shot eliminated a defensive coordinator who had been attempting to re-establish communication between isolated positions. The shot required compensation for wind conditions and elevation differences that would have challenged experienced military snipers. But her rifle spoke with mechanical precision, the bullet finding its target despite environmental factors that should have affected accuracy. Master Sergeant Kim was beginning to understand that something unprecedented was happening in his exercise area. The quiet candidate who had struggled through 2 weeks of basic training was demonstrating capabilities that suggested training far beyond what her service record indicated. "Bravo 7, identify your target selection criteria," Kim transmitted, his professional curiosity overriding his irritation at unauthorized engagement protocols. "How are you identifying enemy positions outside your assigned sector?" Audrey's response was delivered while she was tracking her next target, her voice steady despite the complexity of the tactical situation she was managing. "Bravo Control, enemy defensive network is coordinated through concealed command positions. Eliminating command elements degrades their ability to coordinate effective resistance against Alpha Team advance." The tactical sophistication of her analysis was unmistakable. This wasn't someone following predetermined protocols or engaging targets of opportunity. This was someone who understood the defensive network's organizational structure and was systematically dismantling it through precision elimination of critical personnel. Santos was beginning to reassess everything she thought she knew about her quiet teammate. "Bravo 7, where did you learn tactical analysis? That's not standard communications training." But Audrey was already shifting her attention to the next phase of the tactical situation. Team Alpha had advanced far enough into the building complex to encounter the primary defensive positions that Reynolds had prepared, and despite the degradation of the external command network, those positions still represented significant obstacles to mission completion. Through her scope, she could see that Reynolds had established interlocking fields of fire within the building that would challenge Team Alpha regardless of external support. The interior defensive positions were manned by the most experienced instructors, individuals who could maintain effective resistance even without external coordination. Team Alpha was about to discover that their tactical success in the building's outer areas didn't guarantee continued progress against prepared interior positions. The real test of their assault capabilities was just beginning, and despite Audrey's intervention, they would need to demonstrate genuine tactical competence to complete their mission. But now they would face that test without the additional pressure of coordinated external harassment that would have made their mission nearly impossible. Audrey had leveled the playing field, creating conditions where Team Alpha's training and capabilities could be fairly evaluated against defensive positions that represented realistic but achievable challenges. The exercise was entering its critical phase, and the quiet woman from Position 7 had just demonstrated why certain people in very classified circles had learned to take shadows very seriously indeed. Her intervention had been surgical, precise, and devastatingly effective, transforming what should have been a demonstration of defensive superiority into a fair test of assault capabilities. The mountain wind carried the sounds of intensifying combat as Team Alpha pressed deeper into the building complex, unaware that their tactical success had been enabled by someone they had dismissed as irrelevant. The shadows had spoken, and everything had changed. The tactical situation inside the urban warfare complex had devolved into something Master Sergeant Reynolds had never experienced in 20 years of military service. Her carefully orchestrated defensive plan designed to demonstrate the superiority of prepared positions over assault tactics was crumbling under precision fire from a direction no one had anticipated. The mysterious sniper at Position 7 wasn't just eliminating individual targets. They were systematically destroying the command structure that held her entire defensive network together. "I need eyes on that overwatch position now," Reynolds barked into her communications system, frustration bleeding through her professional composure. "Someone is picking apart our coordination from long range, and we can't maintain defensive integrity if this continues." But Reynolds faced a tactical dilemma that highlighted the exercise's original design flaws. Her defensive personnel were positioned to counter Team Alpha's direct assault, and redeploying them to hunt for a sniper would compromise their ability to defend the building. The exercise parameters had assumed that Team Bravo's overwatch positions would provide limited support, not systematic elimination of defensive command elements. Corporal Hayes was experiencing the kind of tactical success that had eluded him during previous training exercises. His breach team was advancing through the building's eastern corridor with minimal resistance, encountering defensive positions that seemed confused and uncoordinated. What should have been a grinding battle against prepared positions had become a methodical clearing operation. "Alpha Control, this is Alpha 1, Hayes reported, his voice carrying confidence that hadn't been evident during previous exercises. "Resistance is lighter than anticipated. We're maintaining advance toward the primary objective area." Hayes attributed their success to superior assault tactics and aggressive leadership, unaware that his progress was being enabled by precision elimination of defensive coordinators from Position 7. His natural aggressiveness, which had sometimes created problems during training exercises, was proving effective against defensive positions that had lost their command structure. Lieutenant Park was leading his breach team through the building's western approach with similar success, but his analytical mind was beginning to recognize patterns that didn't match expected defensive behavior. "Alpha Control. Enemy defensive positions are operating independently. They're not coordinating mutual support." Park's observation was accurate but incomplete. The defensive positions weren't just operating independently. They were reacting to the systematic elimination of personnel who had been responsible for coordination and communication. Audrey's intervention had transformed a coordinated defensive network into isolated positions that could be defeated through conventional assault tactics. Captain Walsh was beginning to understand that their tactical success exceeded what should have been possible against the level of opposition they were facing. Walsh had enough combat experience to recognize when circumstances were developing more favorably than planning had anticipated, and her professional instincts were telling her that external factors were influencing the tactical balance. "All Alpha elements, maintain aggressive advance but stay alert for changes in defensive posture," Walsh commanded. "Something is degrading enemy coordination, but we don't know if it's sustainable." Her caution was justified. Despite Audrey's elimination of external command elements, the interior defensive positions were manned by experienced instructors who could maintain effective resistance even without external coordination. Team Alpha was approaching the building's core areas where prepared positions and interlocking fields of fire would test their assault capabilities regardless of external support. From Position 7, Audrey was observing the tactical development with satisfaction, but also with growing concern about complications that were developing beyond the immediate exercise area. Her unauthorized engagement of targets had achieved its tactical objectives, but it had also attracted attention from observers who possessed the expertise to recognize that her capabilities exceeded anything indicated by her official service record. Through her scope, she could see personnel moving in the observation areas where exercise evaluators were positioned. Their body language suggested urgent consultations and the kind of focused attention that indicated someone had recognized that unprecedented events were occurring within the exercise area. Her Phantom unit training had emphasized the importance of operational security, and drawing attention from military intelligence professionals represented exactly the kind of exposure that could compromise classified programs. But the immediate tactical situation required her continued attention. Team Alpha was approaching interior defensive positions that would test their capabilities against the most experienced opposition available at Fort Blackstone. Despite her intervention, the exercise's ultimate outcome would depend on whether the assault teams could demonstrate genuine tactical competence against prepared interior positions. Sergeant Santos was experiencing a revelation that challenged everything she had assumed about her quiet teammate. From her position, she could observe the precision and timing of the shots from Position 7, and her technical training allowed her to appreciate the level of skill required for that kind of accuracy under field conditions. "Bravo 7, your shot placement is textbook," Santos transmitted privately. "Where did you train? That's not standard military marksmanship." Audrey's response was carefully non-committal. "Bravo 2, maintain focus on your assigned sector. The exercise is entering a critical phase." But Santos wasn't satisfied with the deflection. Her communications background had taught her to recognize when people were avoiding direct answers, and Audrey's response pattern suggested someone who was accustomed to maintaining operational security about sensitive subjects. Master Sergeant Kim was conducting his own analysis of the tactical developments, and his conclusions were raising questions that extended far beyond the immediate exercise parameters. The systematic elimination of defensive command elements required tactical awareness that suggested intelligence training, combined with marksmanship skills that indicated advanced specialized education. "Colonel Manning," Kim transmitted on the command frequency, "I recommend we conduct immediate review of Bravo 7's background. Her tactical performance exceeds her documented training by several orders of magnitude." Manning had reached the same conclusion through her own analysis of the developing situation. The precision fire from Position 7 wasn't just accurate. It demonstrated understanding of defensive network structures that suggested training in areas not typically available to communications specialists. "Kim, have you been able to contact her previous commanders?" Manning asked. "Ma'am, her service record indicates deployment with standard communications units, but when I attempted to verify specific details, I encountered classification restrictions that require higher authorization levels." Classification restrictions on a communications specialist service record represented exactly the kind of anomaly that suggested involvement with programs that operated outside normal military channels. Manning's experience with special operations had taught her to recognize when conventional explanations didn't account for observed capabilities. Inside the building complex, Team Alpha was beginning to encounter the defensive positions that represented Reynolds's primary resistance capability. These were manned by instructors with extensive combat experience, positioned in locations that offered tactical advantages regardless of external coordination issues. Hayes's breach team encountered their first serious resistance as they approached the building's central stairwell. Defensive positions on the second floor opened fire with precision that forced his team to seek cover and reassess their assault approach. The easy advance through the building's outer areas was ending, and the real test of their capabilities was beginning. Alpha 1 taking effective fire from second-floor positions, Hayes reported, his earlier confidence replaced by professional focus. Request supporting fire on grid coordinates 425 to 337. Park's team was experiencing similar resistance as they approached the building's main objective area. The interior defensive positions were coordinated through visual signals and prepared contingency plans that didn't depend on external communication networks. Despite Audrey's intervention, Team Alpha would need to demonstrate genuine tactical competence to complete their mission. Walsh recognized the exercise was transitioning into its most challenging phase. The exterior defensive network had been neutralized through means she didn't understand, but the interior positions represented obstacles that would require coordinated assault tactics and aggressive leadership to overcome. All Alpha elements, prepare for coordinated assault on interior positions, Walsh commanded. External support has degraded enemy coordination, but we're facing prepared positions with experienced defenders. From Position 7, Audrey was observing developments that would determine whether her intervention had created opportunities for Team Alpha to demonstrate their capabilities, or whether the interior defensive positions would prove too challenging regardless of external support. The exercise was entering its climactic phase, and the quiet woman who had been dismissed as dead weight had fundamentally altered the tactical balance. But the ultimate outcome would depend on whether conventional assault tactics could overcome prepared defensive positions manned by combat veterans. The mountain wind carried the sounds of intensifying combat as the real battle began, and Audrey Scott prepared to discover whether shadows could influence the outcome when conventional tactics met prepared resistance. The stairwell erupted in a symphony of controlled violence as Team Alpha encountered Master Sergeant Reynolds' final defensive line. Flashbang grenades detonated in sequence, their disorienting effects amplified by the concrete walls and narrow confines of the building's interior. Hayes found himself pinned behind a concrete pillar as suppressive fire from the second floor turned the stairwell into a death trap that no amount of aggression could overcome through brute force alone. Alpha 1 is combat ineffective, Hayes transmitted through gritted teeth, his earlier bravado replaced by the stark reality of facing experienced defenders in prepared positions. We need alternate approach routes, or we're going to lose the entire assault element. Captain Walsh was experiencing the kind of tactical crisis that separated competent officers from exceptional ones. Her three-pronged assault had successfully penetrated the building's outer defenses, but the interior positions represented obstacles that conventional assault doctrine couldn't overcome without unacceptable casualties. The easy victories in the building's exterior areas had been replaced by grinding combat against defenders who understood how to use terrain advantages and prepared positions to multiply their effectiveness. Alpha control to all elements, Walsh transmitted, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced similar crises in actual combat zones. Consolidate positions and prepare for coordinated assault. We need simultaneous pressure on all interior defensive positions. But Walsh's tactical analysis was revealing problems that coordination alone couldn't solve. The interior defensive positions had been established with interlocking fields of fire that prevented any single assault route from succeeding without exposing attacking forces to devastating crossfire. Reynolds had positioned her most experienced defenders in locations that maximized their advantages, while minimizing the effectiveness of superior numbers. Lieutenant Park was discovering that analytical intelligence and aggressive tactics weren't sufficient against opponents who possessed decades of combat experience. His breach team had advanced to within 30 meters of their primary objective, but the final approach required crossing an open area that was covered by defensive positions on multiple levels. Alpha 2 requesting immediate suppressive fire, Park transmitted, studying the tactical problem with the intensity of someone who understood that careers could be ended by poor decisions in the next few minutes. Enemy positions have overlapping coverage of all approach routes. From Position 7, Audrey was observing the tactical stalemate with growing understanding that Team Alpha's success would require intervention that went far beyond her official mission parameters. Her elimination of the external defensive network had leveled the playing field, but the interior positions represented challenges that assault tactics alone couldn't overcome. Through her scope, she could identify the defensive positions that were creating the tactical bottleneck, but engaging them would require her to exceed her mission boundaries in ways that would attract immediate attention from exercise evaluators. More importantly, it would demonstrate capabilities that could compromise the operational security of programs that existed beyond the knowledge of most military personnel. But as she watched Hayes' team taking casualties from defensive positions that could have been neutralized with precision fire, her Phantom unit training was asserting priorities that went beyond exercise parameters. Real soldiers were facing real tactical problems, and she possessed capabilities that could prevent unnecessary defeats that would damage careers and confidence. Master Sergeant Kim was conducting his own tactical analysis from the observation area, and his conclusions were forcing him to reassess everything he thought he understood about urban warfare doctrine. Team Alpha was demonstrating competent assault techniques against prepared positions, but their tactical success was being constrained by defensive advantages that represented realistic combat conditions. Colonel Manning, Kim transmitted on the command frequency, Team Alpha is facing tactically sound opposition that reflects real-world defensive capabilities. Their current tactical position represents the kind of stalemate that special operations units encounter in urban environments. Manning was beginning to understand that the exercise was providing exactly the kind of realistic training that Fort Blackstone had been designed to deliver. Team Alpha was learning that superior firepower and aggressive tactics weren't sufficient against opponents who understood how to use terrain advantages and prepared positions effectively. But Manning was also recognizing that the mysterious intervention from Position 7 had created tactical conditions that didn't reflect typical special operations environments. In real-world situations, assault forces rarely received the kind of precision support that had degraded the defensive network's external coordination. Kim, I want detailed analysis of all shots fired from Position 7, Manning ordered. Someone with advanced training is operating outside their documented capabilities, and I need to understand the implications. Sergeant Santos was experiencing her own revelation about the tactical situation developing around her. From her overwatch position, she could observe both Team Alpha's tactical challenges and the continuing precision fire from Position 7 that was systematically eliminating defensive positions that the assault teams couldn't even identify. Bravo 7, I'm observing enemy movement in the northwest building section, Santos transmitted, hoping to understand how her quiet teammate was identifying targets that remained invisible to other observers. Grid coordinates 341 to 298 approximately. Audrey's response came immediately, delivered while she was tracking a defensive coordinator who was attempting to re-establish communication between isolated interior positions. Bravo 2 confirmed enemy personnel in that location. Engaging now. The crack of her rifle punctuated the transmission, and Santos watched through her own scope as a concealed position that she hadn't been able to identify precisely suddenly ceased its coordinated movement. The shot had required compensation for multiple environmental factors and had been delivered while the target was partially concealed behind concrete barriers. Jesus, Santos whispered, her technical training allowing her to appreciate the level of skill required for that kind of precision under combat conditions. Bravo 7, that shot was impossible. How did you even see that target? But Audrey was already shifting her attention to the next tactical problem. Team Alpha's stalemate in the interior positions was reaching a critical point where they would either need to demonstrate exceptional tactical innovation or accept that prepared defensive positions had proven superior to assault capabilities. Through her scope, she could see that Reynolds had positioned her final defensive line with expertise that reflected extensive combat experience. The interior positions were manned by instructors who understood how to maximize defensive advantages while minimizing the effectiveness of superior firepower and aggressive tactics. But Audrey's Phantom Unit training had taught her to identify tactical solutions that conventional military doctrine didn't address. The defensive positions that were constraining Team Alpha's advance were coordinated through visual signals and prepared contingency plans, but they depended on specific personnel who could be eliminated through precision fire from unexpected directions. The decision she faced represented exactly the kind of operational choice that her training had prepared her for. She could maintain her cover by staying within official mission parameters, allowing Team Alpha to face realistic defeat against superior defensive tactics. Or, she could demonstrate capabilities that would compromise operational security, while enabling the kind of tactical success that would validate assault doctrine against prepared positions. Hayes was beginning to understand that his aggressive approach wouldn't overcome the tactical obstacles he was facing. The interior defensive positions required coordination and tactical innovation that went beyond individual heroics and conventional assault techniques. Alpha Control Alpha 1, Hayes transmitted, his voice carrying frustration that reflected the reality of facing opponents who possessed superior tactical advantages. Current approach routes are not viable. We need alternate tactical solutions or we're going to take unacceptable casualties. Walsh recognized that the exercise was reaching its climactic moment. Team Alpha had demonstrated competent assault capabilities against realistic opposition, but the final phase would require tactical innovation that separated exceptional units from merely competent ones. The mountain air carried the sounds of sustained combat as both sides committed to tactical solutions that would determine the exercise outcome. In the observation areas, evaluators were recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented, where conventional tactical assumptions were being challenged by capabilities that extended beyond documented training. Audrey Scott prepared to make the decision that would either preserve her carefully maintained cover or demonstrate why certain shadows were more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The exercise was approaching its climax, and everything depended on choices that would be made in the next few critical minutes. The moment of truth arrived with the sound of shattering glass and the precise crack of a rifle that had been silent for exactly 17 seconds. Master Sergeant Reynolds, positioned behind what she believed was impenetrable cover on the building's 3rd floor, suddenly found her communication headset destroyed by a bullet that had traveled through a window opening measuring less than 8 inches. The shot had been calculated to disable her equipment without causing injury, but its message was unmistakable. Nowhere was safe from the phantom sniper at position 7. "What the hell was that?" Reynolds shouted into her backup communications device, her professional composure finally cracking under the relentless precision of an opponent she couldn't see, couldn't locate, and couldn't counter. For 20 years, she had prided herself on tactical awareness and battlefield control, but this was unlike anything in her experience. Audrey's decision had been made in the fraction of a second between observing Team Alpha's tactical stalemate and recognizing that Reynolds was coordinating a counterattack that would eliminate Hayes' entire breach team. The Phantom unit had trained her to prioritize mission success over operational security when lives were at stake, and this moment demanded capabilities that could no longer remain hidden. Her next 3 shots came in rapid succession, each one eliminating a key defensive position with surgical precision. The first disabled a heavy weapons position that had been suppressing Park's advance. The second eliminated a communications relay that Reynolds had been using to coordinate interior defenses. The third shot removed a sniper who had been preparing to engage Captain Walsh's command element. The tactical effect was immediate and devastating. Reynolds' carefully coordinated final defensive line collapsed into isolated positions that could no longer provide mutual support. Team Alpha, suddenly facing degraded opposition, began advancing with renewed confidence toward their primary objectives. "Alpha Control resistance is collapsing," Walsh reported, her voice carrying amazement at the sudden tactical shift. "All elements advance to final objectives." But in the observation area, Colonel Manning was experiencing a very different kind of revelation. Through high-powered optics, she had been tracking the shots from position 7, and what she observed defied everything she understood about the capabilities documented in Audrey Scott's service record. "Kim, get me a direct line to Pentagon intelligence," Manning ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just witnessed something that extended far beyond routine training exercises. "I need immediate clarification on the background of candidate Scott." The response came faster than normal military channels typically allowed, routed through communication systems that Manning recognized as belonging to the most classified levels of the Department of Defense. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and entirely unsurprised by her inquiry. "Colonel Manning, this is Director Sarah Chen, Phantom Unit Operations. We've been monitoring the exercise through our own channels. Candidate Scott's performance has been within expected parameters for her training level." The casual reference to monitoring systems that Manning hadn't known existed sent cold understanding through her professional consciousness. Audrey Scott wasn't just another candidate being evaluated for conventional special operations. She was an operative from a program so classified that its existence was known only to the highest levels of military intelligence. "Director Chen, what exactly is the Phantom Unit, and why wasn't I briefed about having one of your operatives in my training program?" Chen's response carried the patient tone of someone explaining classified realities to those with sufficient clearance to understand them. "Colonel, the Phantom Unit creates operatives who can function in environments where conventional special forces would be detected and eliminated. Candidate Scott has been conducting a real-world evaluation of her ability to maintain operational cover while providing tactical support under combat conditions." Hayes' breach team was advancing through the building's final corridor when the realization hit him that their sudden tactical success couldn't be explained by conventional factors. The defensive positions that had seemed insurmountable minutes earlier were now silent or abandoned, and their advance was encountering minimal resistance. Alpha 1 to Alpha Control, Hayes transmitted, his voice carrying confusion alongside professional satisfaction. Enemy defensive coordination has completely collapsed. We're encountering isolated positions with no mutual support. Park was experiencing similar tactical success, but his analytical mind was recognizing patterns that didn't match normal combat development. Alpha 2 to Alpha Control, someone is providing precision fire support that's systematically eliminating enemy command capabilities. This isn't random tactical degradation. Captain Walsh had reached the same conclusion through her own analysis of the tactical situation. Their assault was succeeding, but external factors were enabling success that their tactics alone couldn't have achieved. All Alpha elements maintain aggressive advance but acknowledge that we're receiving support from external sources, Walsh commanded. Complete primary objectives but understand that our tactical performance is being enhanced by capabilities outside our direct control. From Position 7, Audrey was observing the successful completion of Team Alpha's mission with satisfaction, but also with growing awareness that her intervention had attracted exactly the kind of attention that Phantom Unit operations were designed to avoid. Through her scope, she could see personnel in the observation areas conducting the kind of urgent consultations that indicated her cover had been compromised. Sergeant Santos was experiencing revelations that challenged everything she thought she understood about military training and special operations capabilities. The precision fire from Position 7 had demonstrated tactical awareness and marksmanship skills that exceeded anything she had encountered during years of military service. Bravo 7, I need to ask you directly, Santos transmitted on a private frequency. What unit did you really serve with? Because communications specialists don't receive training that enables what I've been observing. Audrey's response was delivered with the calm professionalism that had characterized all her communications, but Santos could detect subtle changes that suggested someone dropping a carefully maintained facade. Bravo 2, some training programs aren't documented in conventional service records. Today's exercise required capabilities that standard protocols couldn't provide. The admission was subtle but unmistakable. Santos was hearing acknowledgement from someone who had been operating under deep cover throughout their time at Fort Blackstone. Master Sergeant Kim was coordinating with exercise evaluators who were struggling to process tactical developments that extended far beyond normal training parameters. The systematic elimination of defensive positions from Position 7 had demonstrated capabilities that suggested training programs he had never encountered. Colonel Manning, Candidate Scott's tactical performance indicates training that goes far beyond what's available through conventional military channels, Kim reported. I recommend immediate security review of her background and current status. But Manning had already received clarification that placed the entire exercise in a very different context. Audrey Scott wasn't a communications specialist who had somehow acquired advanced training. She was an operative from a classified program conducting real-world evaluation of capabilities that conventional military training couldn't produce. As Team Alpha completed their primary objectives and began consolidating their tactical success, the exercise was transitioning from training evaluation to something approaching operational debriefing. The participants had demonstrated various levels of competence, but the exercise outcome had been determined by intervention from capabilities that existed outside normal military doctrine. Reynolds emerged from the building complex with the expression of someone who had just experienced tactical defeat that defied her understanding of urban warfare principles. Her defensive plan had been comprehensive and professionally executed, but it had been systematically dismantled by precision fire from a position that shouldn't have possessed the capability to impact the exercise outcome. Colonel Manning, Reynolds said, approaching the observation area with confusion evident in her voice, I need to understand what happened out there. My defensive positions were eliminated by someone with capabilities that exceed anything in my experience. Manning's response carried the weight of information that couldn't be shared with personnel who lacked appropriate security clearances. Master Sergeant, today's exercise included elements that extended beyond conventional training parameters. Your defensive plan was tactically sound, but circumstances included factors that normal doctrine doesn't address. As the exercise officially concluded and participants began moving toward debriefing areas, Audrey maintained her carefully constructed facade of someone who had performed adequately within her assigned parameters. Her equipment was properly secured, her position was correctly abandoned, and her demeanor suggested relief that challenging training had been completed successfully. But as she walked past other candidates who were discussing their tactical experiences with animated enthusiasm, Several of them were beginning to look at her with expressions that suggested growing recognition that something unprecedented had occurred during the exercise. The quiet woman they had dismissed as dead weight had just demonstrated capabilities that redefined their understanding of what was possible within the boundaries of military training. The shadows had spoken with devastating effectiveness, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Colonel Manning watched Audrey's departure with newfound understanding of the forces that operated in the spaces between conventional military operations and classified programs that existed beyond public knowledge. The exercise had been a success, but not in ways that anyone had anticipated. The mountain wind carried the scent of pine and the promise that some secrets, once revealed, could never be completely hidden again. Fort Blackstone had just witnessed something extraordinary, and the woman they called the Shadow had proven exactly why that nickname was more than earned. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.